Hello everybody, and welcome to Spiritual Metaphysics 101. My name is Jerry Yakov and I'm your host. I'm also a student and teacher of metaphysics. And to me, metaphysics means attaining the realization of our highest self. It would be a state of awareness. Some people call it a process of enlightenment or transcending the ego, becoming one with the true self with a capital S. All these things, I think, are the episodes that you and I share each week. And this particular week, I'm referring to Thich Nhat Hanh, and I've used his writings in the past, but I made particular mention of the mindfulness trainings of the Buddhism. And Buddhist mindfulness trainings are particularly important, of course, in Thich Nhat Hanh's meditations and Thich Nhat Hanh's Plum Village, where he has a hermitage and a community of monastics and lay people. So the first is reverence for life. Let me read this verbatim and then we'll talk a little bit about the first mindfulness training. Reverence for life. Aware of the suffering caused by the destruction of life, I am committed to cultivating the insight of interbeing and compassion, and learning ways to protect the lives of people, animals, plants, and minerals. I am determined not to kill, not to let others kill, and not to support any act of killing in the world in my thinking or in my way of life. Seeing that harmful actions arise from anger, fear, greed, and intolerance, which in turn come from dualistic and discriminative thinking, I will cultivate openness, non-discrimination, and non-attachment to views in order to transform violence, fanaticism, and dogmatism in myself and in the world. Well, this is a lovely start, to the whole notion of thou shalt not kill. The first commandment, of course, of the 10 Commandments. And thou shalt not kill, as Thich Nhat Hanh is making reference to in the Buddhist tradition, also explores the thinking, the way of life, the expression, if you will, of each of us in the world. Are we being as loving and as kind and as nurturing and as compassionate as the Dalai Lama, for instance, teaches in his wisdom and his way of teaching metaphysics? The Dalai Lama talks a lot about compassion, which would be the other side, I think, of the coin of I will not kill, or support killing, or support thinking that advances the notion of competitiveness or egotism, one or the other, taking advantage of. So there's a whole possibility in this first mindfulness training, simply taking the ontological and philosophical and maybe even theological, if that's, that fits for you, the theological idea and principle that I support life in all its forms. On a personal example, I would say that my wife and I certainly don't eat as much meat as we used to. And I saw something on the news, it was a documentary about the food industry and the way that chickens, for instance, are raised and then slaughtered. And I've cut way back on my consumption of chicken unless it's free range and in some way treated and then processed for consumption in a more humane way. It's a step that I can take. But Thich Nhat Hanh, in his community, they are, as far as I know, complete vegetarians and vegan. So, they would eat a diet that consists of tofu for their protein and so forth. They don't eat any meats whatsoever. But each of us, I think, would begin, as my wife and I have done, in a way that is consistent with our advancement, our spiritual awakening and advancement. And the first noble truth, the mindfulness training, is that we honor all life. We have a reverence for life. I like particularly the term reverence because it means that there is, as referenced in here, an interbeingness. I have a reverence for you in the same way that I'm developing a reverence for myself. You and I are one in interbeingness of life. And that includes plants and minerals as well. So it says, I will cultivate openness, non-discrimination, and non-attachment to views. And it also made reference to a dualistic view. We want to cultivate a non-dualistic view. Non-dualism says that I don't see you as the other or different. That would be a dualistic view. I'm the, the subject and you're the object of my perception. In a non-dualistic view, I see, of course, the form, which represents a separation of sorts. But I'm not tricked or fooled into thinking that is the essence of who you are. The essence of who you are and the essence of who I am transcends dualism. And it's a non-dualistic interbeingness and a reverence for the life that we both represent in form. Well, that's the first one, reverence for life. Let's now go on to the second mindfulness training, and that's true happiness. And these are things that we're to practice. And this is something that I need to work on and am working on continuously. And that's the idea. Well, let me read it first and then I'll comment. It says, aware of the suffering caused by exploitation, social injustice, stealing, and oppression, I am committed to practicing generosity in my thinking, speaking, and acting, determined not to steal and not to possess anything that should belong to others. And then it goes on, and I will share my time, energy, and material resources with those who are in need. I will practice looking deeply to see that the happiness and suffering of others are not separate from my own happiness and suffering. That true happiness is not possible without understanding and compassion. And then it says, I am committed to practicing right livelihood so that I can help reduce the suffering of living beings on Earth and reverse the process of global warming. So they've really taken, a most postmodern, recent view of what it means to live in the now in terms of a reverence for all life and for being truly happy. And that's a sense of generousness, a sense of giving. And as my Spiritual Path, A Course in Miracles teaches, it is in the advancement of giving that we can then know true happiness, because it's the same as receiving. If I'm extending love and light, generosity, kindness, compassion, I'm receiving it as well, because I can't extend something that I'm not aware that I also possess. And A Course in Miracles is very big on forgiveness. So when I know I'm forgiven, I can forgive others for their mistakes. And in that sense, my own mistakes and my own guilt are relieved as well. And this leads to true happiness. So regarding the true happiness, I wanted to share on a personal note as well that when we're practicing a particular dharma, when we're practicing a particular spiritual path, let's say in regards to true happiness, we're not feeling happy. We're not feeling particularly up a particular day. The interesting thing about having a program is I'm aware that one of my mindfulness trainings is to cultivate true happiness. So I have a program that I can go back and look at deeply what it is that's between me and experiencing true happiness. Am I withholding myself? Am I not fully expressing myself? Am I in some way disregarding the reverence for all life, which was the first noble truth? It gives me some criteria for insights, rather than just feeling bad and not knowing what to do about it or how to look at it more deeply. We have peg marks. And I have a feeling that when we look through those marks, those peg marks, as we continue through the 5 mindfulness trainings, you'll get a sense that it'll contribute to your happiness. It'll contribute to your reverence for life. You'll, just as you practice and practice and practice, realize, my goodness, this is truly working in my life. This is not something in the abstract. And this is what's so important, I think, in the spiritual path, that it has practical application. So, not being happy, not being completely fulfilled in a particular moment, Someone could go back and say, what is it that I need to understand and have compassion for myself about? Or am I holding somebody else in a condition of lack of understanding and compassion? Can I give them the compassion that I'm withholding? And then it would lead to our happiness, true happiness. So that's the first two. Let's go on to number 3, which is true love. Aware of the suffering caused by sexual misconduct, I am committed to cultivating responsibility and learning ways to protect the safety and integrity of individuals, couples, families, and society. Knowing that sexual desire is not love, and that sexual activity motivated by craving always harms myself as well as others, I am determined not to engage in sexual relations without true love and a deep, long-term commitment made known to my family and friends. I will do everything in my power to protect children from sexual abuse and to prevent couples and families from being broken by sexual misconduct. Seeing that body and mind are one, I am committed to learning appropriate ways to take care of my sexual energy and cultivating loving kindness, compassion, joy, and inclusiveness, which are the 4 basic elements of true love, for my greater happiness and the greater happiness of others. Practicing true love, we know that we will continue beautifully into the future. Well, okay, so there's a connection here between the true happiness and the true love. It says, I'm committed to learning appropriate ways to take care of this energy and cultivate loving kindness and compassion, which was a reference we had for reverence for life and for true happiness. And it says the 4 basic elements of true love are compassion, joy, inclusivity, and loving kindness. The whole idea behind these mindfulness trainings is to be mindful, and it is a training. So if we were completely adept at being mindful, then the training aspect would probably not be necessary. But we find ourselves lacking in these pieces of wisdom, if you will, and the way to translate them into our lives. We don't have a complete reverence for life. We don't have full and complete joy and happiness. We don't know true love and compassion and loving kindness. They're natural to us. They're really, who and what we are. Reverence for life, happiness, love. That's exactly our essence. But we're layered over by so many distortions, which we call ego. And so the training part of mindfulness is repeating over and over again what really is our essence, so that the unnatural parts of our thinking, the unnatural parts of being mindless rather than mindful, start to drop away. And we start to become a whole different person. Different in the sense that we're now mindful rather than mindless, but not different in that we're becoming true to ourselves, knowing ourselves, acting consistent with who and what we really are. And that's a creation of love and an expression of love. Well, let's go on a little bit further. The next one is called loving speech and deep listening. You can see that the theme for reverence for life and true love, true happiness, it goes on and in the same vein of mindfully practicing who and what we really are and representing that in the world and seeing others as being in process, if you will, so that they become more and more mindful and loving and reverent. So, loving speech and deep listening, aware of the suffering caused by unmindful speech and the inability to listen to others, I am committed to cultivating loving speech and compassionate listening in order to relieve suffering and to promote reconciliation and peace in myself and among other people, ethnic and religious groups. I am committed to speaking truthfully, using words that inspire confidence, joy, and hope. When anger is manifesting in me, I am determined not to speak. I will practice mindful breathing and walking in order to recognize and to look deeply into my anger. I know that the roots of anger can be found in my wrong perceptions and lack of understanding of the suffering in myself and others. I will practice right diligence to nourish my capacity for understanding, love, joy, and inclusiveness, and gradually transform anger, violence, and fear that lie deep in my consciousness. I love the languaging of these mindfulness trainings because they resonate so much with that which is a problem in our society and individually in our own thinking. If we would only listen more deeply, if we would only look more compassionately at others. And what I think is meant by compassion is recognizing the difficulties of other people and recognizing that they are the same difficulties that we've experienced, so that we have compassion for them, true empathy, if you will. And we also understand that since we're making progress in our mindfulness, we know that others can do the same. We don't discount their ability to make progress and to advance as a mindful, spiritual being, spirit, if you will. It's very important that we recognize the spiritual essence of others and that they too can be mindful. They may not be practicing it. They may not have mindfulness trainings that they're using, but that further gives us reason for compassion and empathy, because we remember when we didn't have a program and when we were so confused and life seemed so chaotic. So there's a true respectfulness and a love, and also, as Tay calls it, an interbeingness. I think in the Christian tradition we say, "There but for the grace of God go I." I have compassion for you. I know what you're going through. So that is loving speech and deep listening. And then the final mindfulness training for the 5 mindfulness trainings is called nourishment and healing. Aware of the suffering caused by unmindful consumption, I am committed to cultivating good health, both physical and mental, for myself, my family, and my society, by practicing mindful eating, drinking, and consuming. It says, I will practice coming back to the present moment and be in touch with refreshing, healing, nourishing elements in me and around me, not letting regrets and sorrow drag me back into the past, nor letting anxieties and fears or craving pull me out of the present moment. I am determined not to try to cover up loneliness, anxiety, or other suffering by losing myself in consumption. I will contemplate interbeing and consume in a way that preserves peace, joy, and well-being in my body and consciousness, and the collective body and consciousness of family, society, and the earth. So here, this nourishment and healing, it makes also a reference to the use of gambling, alcohol, drugs, and other products and toxins that electronic games, TV programs, films, magazines, books, and conversations, gossip, misuse of our words, mischaracterization of other people, holding on to of anger and resentments. All these things stand between us and nourishment and healing of our minds and our bodies. It's a very holistic view, isn't it? We're looking at our minds and our bodies and our spiritual life and our emotions, but then we move out into the holistic view of our families and our communities, and then other nations as well. So it becomes so holistic and so open to the interbeingness of the planet and of the whole earth, that we're really in alignment, if you will, with the true nature of self. And that is the end goal, is to be in alignment with true self and know the peace and serenity that comes with that. It's only when we're out of alignment with true self, which includes not being reverent for life, not practicing true love and true happiness, monitoring our thinking, watching what we're consuming, both visually as well as edibly. When we're not doing these things, then the world appears to be chaotic and fearful, and we're ridden with anxieties and fears. But when we're minding to these elements in ourselves, then the world takes on a different perspective, and we know that we can contribute to the realignment of the world so that it is based in the remedial, the mindful, the happy, the joyous. We're being an extension of the love and the light. And that's what we're here to be. I think it's a twofold process. We're here to learn, because Earth School is the place where we learn these things to be mindful. And then we practice the mindfulness that we are learning so that other people can get a sense of what it means to live a life well lived. And a life well lived does not in any sense mean consumption per se, abundance for the sake of pleasure per se. It means contributing. It means being compassionate and listening. It means deep listening. It means compassion in terms of our view of other people and animals and the planet itself. All these things work in tangent with one another. And when we become good trainees, good students, if you will, we then naturally look for a Sangha or another community that's practicing similarly, because we want to practice with them. I think exponentially we learn faster. It accelerates the advancement of our learning. I hope that this brief introduction to the 5 mindfulness trainings is being helpful to you. If you've been looking for a path, or you want to expand your reading so that it can contribute to the path that you're already on, I really recommend that you read Thich Nhat Hanh. And we will have a graphic at the end of the show which will give you some connections to his writings, and particularly this website where I got the 5 mindfulness trainings, and you can pick them up for yourself. Listen to what it says in synopsis of the 5 mindfulness trainings. It says that they represent the Buddhist vision for a global spiritual ethic. They are guidelines for everyday living and are the basis for a happy life. They are a concrete expression of the Buddha's teachings, the path of right understanding and a true love, leading to healing, transformation, and happiness for ourselves and for the world. To practice the 5 mindfulness trainings is to cultivate the insight of interbeing, or right view, which can remove all discrimination, intolerance, anger, fear, and despair. If we live according to the 5 mindfulness trainings, we are not lost in confusion about our life in the present or in fears about the future. So again, in synopsis, the 5 mindfulness trainings are developed from the 5 ancient Buddhist precepts: not to kill, not to steal, no misuse of sex, no lying or taking drugs and intoxicants. Well, again, there's a real parallel to the 10 Commandments. But I think that the mindfulness training doesn't have the guilt, which may be concomitant with the 10 Commandments. There's a sense in the commandments of guilt or sin if you violate them. You don't have that here because there is no deity per se. And I think that may be a lot more palatable to many people. I know that as a Jew trained in the Old Testament and the 10 Commandments, I was really struck by the sense of sin and guilt and fear of God that seemed to be instilled in the teaching. None of that, and I'm not comparing one as better than the other, but none of that seems to be inherent in the mindfulness trainings of the Buddha. The Buddha is not about sin and guilt. He is about undoing suffering. Now one could say, well, suffering, of course, is because we feel so guilty and sinful. But they never discuss it in the way that if you violate these mindfulness trainings, you should feel guilty. you should feel that you are a sinner and that you should feel bad. None of that exists, and I think for me anyway, it's a lot more appealing. But I like to draw from many teachings. Mystical Christianity, I think, and Jesus' teachings is very beautiful. Many parts of the Old Testament and the love and the light of God in creation is very beautiful. I particularly enjoy the Buddhist traditions and the Hindu traditions. We've also in some episodes made reference to Paramahansa Yogananda and the Hindu Krishna tradition, which again all is about God-centered compassion and deep listening, deep looking. We have to go into the silence. We have to have some form of prayer and meditation to become mindful in our everyday life. If we don't take time out every day, and this is something that I'm practicing and need to practice so much more, carving out time each day to go into the silence and ask for that inner deep listening so that the seeds of the mindfulness training can sprout and flourish. It's the only way that they can grow. They don't grow if we don't pay attention to them. If any of you are gardeners, you have to water, you have to fertilize, you have to feed, you have to weed. I think weeding is particularly important as an analogy, that we have to take out the negative mindlessness, the sin and the guilt and the fear. And what's left, of course, are the seeds of the mindfulness training. So again, in summary, it's a reverence for life. It's true happiness, being practiced, true happiness, true love, loving speech and deep listening, and finally, nourishment and healing of mind, body, and spirit. And we take that individually, family, collectively, and the world at large, and the universe. Because we have no idea how far these trainings will take us in terms of our awareness and the effects of our awareness. Sometimes we think that it's very limited, but the truth is that as we unfold in our mindfulness, it has great effects on the rest of the world. Some say that the mindful people on the planet are holding the whole planet together, and that the majority of mindless people cannot undo the good work of the minority who are being mindful. So it's very important, and again, not to feel guilty, but it's very important that we do our share, and that we do the work for ourselves and for the planet and for everybody in the world. We are as God created us. We are love. Namaste, shalom, and peace.